Hello everyone, welcome to a new Process Mining Café. It's the first one after the summer break, and we have a very special topic today, which I think is a great application area for process mining. We are going to talk about healthcare processes. Healthcare processes, I have a lot of potential for process mining. You can have a big impact with them, but they're also not that easy. And so I invited, I think, the perfect person to talk much more about this topic with us here today. So welcome, Owen Johnson from Leeds University. Hi, Owen.
Hi, it's lovely to meet you. I'm prepared. So I have prepared my coffee already. So
yes,
ready to go.
You're here with your coffee, ready for the Process Mining Café. That's perfect. And before we start right away. I just want to remind you all that we are doing these sessions live, so that you can, be there with us. And if you want, you can add your own comments or questions. You can put them in the chat just below the video where you're watching this right now. You don't need an account. Just type your name or any name and click the button, and then you're in there. And we will keep an eye on the chat while we are going along. All right, so let's get started right away. So, Owen, the title of today's Process Mining Café is clinical pathways. There's also the term Clearpath. You and your research group, you have been working in healthcare, but also process mining with healthcare for so many years. So let's start there a little bit with.
So that really ought to be a nice, simple question to kick off with, shouldn't it? It's not an easy question. What I say to people, my simplest answer is a care pathway is a type of business process. And that immediately connects it to process mining. But your question is kind of a little bit more subtle than that, and it's about what is a care pathway or a clinical pathway. And the way to think about this is, well, firstly, I think Annie were right to say that that healthcare is a very interesting domain for process mining. It's a domain that we all care about because we're all going to be on care pathways in our lives, and we'll have relatives who have had that already. And many of us, I'm sure, have got stories about how you've interacted or relatives have interacted with healthcare in good and bad ways. So the starting point maybe is to think about how doctors are trained. Now, doctors are trained based on protocols. So, when they see a particular condition, they should check the following. And so doctors have a very protocol-driven training, but they're also supposed to use their initiative and to kind of think outside the box and make connections. But the protocol bit can be quite often described as a care pathway or a clinical pathway. So there are many other words like clinical protocol or guidelines. But you can see it's from our world as process miners, we can see this as yet another business process. Yeah. So the clinicians will use care pathway or clinical pathway. I think, just say, okay, but it's a business process.
But do they think of it as a process, or do they think of it as kind of a protocol, which is not? Do they have process thinking around it in a certain way, or?
They quite often. I mean, I've worked with lots of different clinicians of different levels, and also lots of hospital managers and administration, and some of them think in a process-oriented way. But you're right, a lot of them don't really see that, and I'd say kind of worse than that is that individual specialists within their domain will see the silo that they operate within, and what they won't see is the process that took place before the patient arrived at their door, and the process that takes place after the patient leaves their door. And so you're right. There's a really interesting conversation just about process thinking. And I do spend a lot of my time just sort of trying to kind of partly talk the language of clinicians, but also help clinicians talk the language of process.
Right. And so your research was in the healthcare domain?
Okay. I had a road to Damascus revelation. I was given I worked in healthcare. I was given an academic sabbatical And I went away to America and I studied and studied, and I invented process mining. And I thought, oh, let's type that into Google and see if anyone else is doing that. This was about 10 years ago, and I kind of thought, oh, somebody called Van der Elst. Oh, yeah, okay, I've seen his work before. And I kind of like, I've stumbled into the world of process mining thinking I'd invented it, and then realizing that actually loads of people are already doing it.
That's so funny.
But I felt like, yeah, this should be really huge, and then it was really huge. I now know.
Great.
So that's
great.
how I found it. But I was working in healthcare data prior to that.
Yes, and so you got to apply it for many different projects. You worked with a lot of students, PhD students, and so on and so forth, right? So, yeah, there's a lot of work there. We can't talk about everything, but to demonstrate a little bit the
Yeah. So we can maybe come back a bit to some of the challenges in healthcare, but there are many challenges in many dimensions, and one of them is just data quality. To the extent that just data may not be there at all, or what the data that's in the electronic systems is only a fraction of what we really need to know about what's happening in care. So this case study, I think, is kind of interesting in that. The other thing about healthcare is that busy hospitals, busy clinicians deal with many different types of patient.
Yes.
And so, one patient coming through the door might be very simple.
Mm-hmm.
The next person might be very simple. The next person might have a number of multiple complex needs. And so healthcare clinicians are always kind of on their toes, trying to spot the complicated cases from the simple ones. Mm-hmm. And make sure that they're making the most appropriate decisions. So this case study, and the reason why I chose this one to talk about is that it's Functional Neurological Syndrome, which is sudden pains, either in attacks on your sensory nervous system or your motor nervous system, which might give you sudden sharp pains, might suddenly mean that you lose the movement in one arm. And these attacks can last for a couple of minutes to several days, and be completely debilitating. Now, it's a very rare but specialist area. Mm-hmm. And if you can get the patient correctly diagnosed to a FNS, Functional Neurological Syndrome clinic, then there are specialists who can treat them. Right. However, most patients don't know they've got this. They just feel lousy and in pain and very worried, and they'll ring an ambulance or they'll present at an emergency department. And because it's a rare case, the emergency department don't know, they haven't necessarily got protocols which allow them to kind of quickly work out what it is. And so we were aware anecdotally the functional neurological syndrome patients had a really difficult time in hospital getting an accurate diagnosis and getting accurate treatment. And we were aware anecdotally that they would be misdiagnosed with a range of other possible conditions and be subject to very long examinations, investigations to try and understand what the condition was.
Right. So that was a hypothesis when you went in. So that's something that you already knew or thought to be true.
Yeah. So what happened was we had a clinical lead for FNS who was at Leeds Teaching Hospital Trust, which is one of the larger ones in Europe. So a big hospital trust. He, as a practicing clinician, was aware of the huge range of difficulties with all his colleagues in the rest of the hospital, but obviously as one specialist he can't run around the whole of the hospital changing all their practice for what is a relatively rare disease. So the approach that he and I kind of had a long chat about this, and the approach that we agreed was to hire 2 medical students for best part of 8 months, and their job was to identify and track patients potentially with functional neurological syndrome through the hospital. And so we basically set two very clever young medical students off on the task of go and find us data. And they were outstanding. They rang the emergency department every 48 hours and said, have you had any new patients with the following symptoms?
Right.
They were there. They were on site, in and out of the hospital all the time. For every patient that they thought might have functional neurological syndrome, they went through the electronic records and then went through the paper records. And they went back for a period of several years. So if we got a patient who's turned up at an emergency department, they went back and traced all the previous interactions that this person had had. And even the paper records weren't great. So they then went off and interviewed those clinicians who had written their name in on the paper records, or whose user IDs was on the on the electronic records. They went round to the radiology departments and the CT departments and the MRI scanners, and really did a fantastic detective work of pinning the story of every single one of these patients. So 212 patients altogether, of which some were definitely functional neurological syndrome, some were probably, and actually some turned out that they had very similar symptoms but weren't. So I think of all those patients, they obviously created a very rich experiential data set, but we managed to get them to type it all into a spreadsheet in the form of an event log. And that's people online, people in the cafe will know. It's great, it's an event log. Yes. Okay, we can do stuff.
Yes.
So as you know, if you can get an event log, you can start doing process mining.
Right.
And so we brought in a research fellow who had been doing a lot of process mining in healthcare for me already. As you and the audience know, there's a lot of work needs to be done to prepare the data, to kind of understand data quality issues, to understand missingness, and to kind of aggregate codes together and decide which events are of interest. So we did all that, got an event log that was pretty good, and we were using Disco. And in particular, the bit of Disco that really was powerful was the animation button, which I'm kind of guessing people online have played with. If you've never played with this, press that animation button. Are you going to show it, Anne? Is that okay?
Yeah, we brought it exactly to show you, so we can show the outcome.
Guys, if you watch this, hopefully you can see this on your screen. This is the result of our medical students coding all these FNS patients. So each yellow dot is a patient. These are real patients, and as they move around, this is actually the life history or the treatment history of these patients. And I think that I love this animation process because it kind of very, very visually straight away says that there's a circular path to the emergency department. The emergency department, if you can't see, is the top in the middle there.
Yeah, it's top in the middle. So I moved
top in the middle, and you can see that people are coming into the emergency department, but they're going through the hospital having loads of different diagnoses. So you can see CT scan, you can see MRI scans, ECGs. They're having all these diagnoses, and they're going off to different clinics. They're even being admitted to psychology. So they're being admitted lots of different places, but they're back and back to the emergency department over and over again.
Yeah.
And so tells a very simple story of what's happening to these patients. It confirms what we knew anecdotally, that patients are not getting diagnosed correctly within the hospital. They are therefore going through loads of expensive investigations that are not to do with the disease. So it's costing the health service a lot of money to investigate a condition that didn't exist. Now that may be good because they may be eliminating more serious illnesses, and so not necessarily criticism, but it does mean that it costs the patients a lot of time. Patients are in a lot of pain, and often not getting diagnosed for months, if not years. The shocking figure that we found was that they were 4 times more likely to represent an emergency department than to be correctly diagnosed.
Right. Wow. That's
which is kind of shocking, isn't it? You imagine that if you're in, or if you had a relative in that kind of pain, you really kind of want a hospital to sort you out, and the idea that you've got a 1 in 4 chance of being sorted out, as opposed to being sent away and coming back again, is horrible.
And what you said is that you presented this at a medical conference, right, to medical professionals, and they were quite shocked to see this.
Yeah, and that was to me. I mean, we've written a paper, and I think Anne's going to put the links to the paper in the chat. And so there's an academic paper, but to me, the really powerful thing was that the 2 medical students went to the main neurological conference in the UK, and they got a big TV monitor, and they put this animation up on the screen in the conference in the poster sessions. So where everyone else was doing posters, they were just doing this video and talking about it. And the power of this video was phenomenal, I think, because it was just pretty much everybody was interested in going and have a look at the animation, discussing it. And the shock of real patients going round and round the hospital was probably had a stronger impact, I suspect, than the journal paper, because the journal paper obviously goes to a largely academic audience, and but a lot of the people at this conference were practicing clinicians in the roles of dealing with neurological syndromes in large hospitals. So what the other finding that I think is relevant, it's in the paper, but also relevant for practice, was what we did identify was you could identify good practice in the process mining. And where good practice occurred, the patients had much better outcomes and faster outcomes. So we were able to kind of say, well, actually, if we can disseminate the good practice that exists in hospitals more widely, we can actually do a better case for our patients.
Right. Does this relate back to the protocols? Were there some protocols which had some checks on there, which others didn't, or could they be enhanced, or how does this look like an improvement, in this sense?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's hard to answer. Is that when a clinician is trained, they're trained with hundreds of protocols, and obviously in their heads they need to think, okay, I think this is functional neurological syndrome, therefore I will apply this protocols. So clinicians are kind of thinking which protocol, and so I would say that because it's a rare condition, they're not necessarily thinking, okay, I need to eliminate this condition. So yeah, one of the challenges is there are so many protocols in a clinician's head, and if they're written down, you tend to, sadly, in most processes, people operate on an 80-20 rule, which is that you prioritize the 80% that are relatively easy, get those done. The 20% that may be more complicated tend to have more unusual patterns. And then there, in this case, with something like FNS, where it's very rare, it's in that kind of 1% bracket, where the standard protocols just don't spot things.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Okay, great. Thanks. In the chat, we have a question from Jeroen, who's asking if this research is published in writing, and it is. So Jeroen and everyone, when we published the video, maybe 2 weeks or something, along with the video in the show notes, we will link all the papers in open access version, so you can read the research and the study in detail if you want.
Yeah. And just to add, there's what Anne's going to put in the chat is a number of links to a number of papers. The full neurological syndrome paper is going to be one of the links, but another link will be to my Clearpath paper. And one of the case studies in my Clearpath paper is a very short summary of this case as well. So if you can just read the short summary of the case study first, unless you're a practicing clinician who really wants to dive deep.
Right. Yes, we will talk about this Clearpath paper in a moment. But before we go there, I just want to maybe pause once more about what you mentioned in the beginning, right? So where do the challenges come from? So we can see the potential impact and the benefits, and I think that example illustrates this beautifully. So I think that's very clear. But why is it so difficult? So one thing you mentioned is the complexity. So that's, often patients are not one-dimensional. They might have multiple illnesses, right? So all that, I think the problem space itself is very complex, and every patient has maybe individual needs. And so it's not, you can never have kind of a simple linear process that applies to everyone, and we don't want that. So that's kind of one reason for the complexity of the domain itself. But you also mentioned data quality. And with data quality, so I wanted to check with you, because for me, that's always an example that I give when people wonder about why data quality is poor, or so that, for example, in healthcare, often, the focus is different, right? The focus is on helping the patients. It might be also about there's financial kind of system behind. So everything that you're doing, a lab test, an exam, needs to be reimbursed somehow. So often that's the focus, so that the documentation is tailored towards that. But in that setting, timestamps, for example, are not that important, right? If it's one day before or after, if for a reimbursement of an exam, it doesn't matter. But for process mining, we all know timestamps are kind of the Achilles heel. So it's just not, would you agree that that's the reason that, the data quality is a challenge? Or
all of those, one or two things. Just to say, I help run the Pods for Health, which is the main academic conference in process mining and healthcare,
right.
Which will be the call for abstracts is I think it closes on Friday. So
we can link that too.
But it will. It will. Some people online hopefully will come. It's in Uruguay this year, which will be very exciting. In October as part of ICPM. But we've worked in healthcare with colleagues around the world for 8 years. We've run this workshop. So we've written a paper on the complexities and challenges of healthcare data, which, so if another reading, it's those people that want reading, we've kind of listed a whole range of different challenges. And I think you've kind of touched on the main ones. I think the unit of work in healthcare is a human being, not a car or an airline ticket. It's a person. And as people, they can just get up and walk out. So the unit of work just disappears and goes off to the loo or misses an appointment. Or but then obviously biologically, the human body is an incredibly complex organism at every level, from molecular through to psychology and behavioral aspects. So we're talking about what I would see as one of the most complex industries. It's very hard to think of another industry where everything is so complex.
And so high stakes.
It's so high stakes as well. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you imagine, mistakes. One of the examples I give to people that do, prediction, is if I build an AI that accurately diagnoses 99 times out of 100, that 100th person is really going to be suffering. And so the stakes are incredibly high, and we can't afford 1 in 100 wrong, or 1 in 1,000, to be honest. So we need an awful lot of care. But there's another aspect to this, which is that people's data is incredibly sensitive. So everybody online, I think, might feel quite strongly if their relatives' care records were being pored over by some analyst, and it's emotional. It's emotional that people want to know that their personal records, their personal data, very, very private stuff, and you need to know it's being handled correctly and sensitively. So the layers of governance that we put around healthcare data are getting rightly very, very stringent.
Right.
And so that's an extra complexity as well.
Exactly. No, that's absolutely right. But that's good also that you mentioned. So let's put that link also in the show notes with the different sources or the identification of the different reasons why it's so complex. But yeah, so I think now I suggest let's come to the second part of the session today, where we wanted to look at, well, how do you then deal with this, right? And that's why I told people also, even if they're not in healthcare specifically, working in healthcare directly, it's going to be interesting for them to listen today, because it's an interesting story, but also because parts of these problems you have in other domains as well, right? There are other domains which are very complex. There are other domains where where privacy is very important, and all of this. So one way we deal with this is that we have good methods or methodologies, like how do we actually perform a cross-mining analysis, and there are certain steps that you can go through. And so there's different reference frameworks in the academic world. A lot of people use the PM2 methodology, which we will link, of course. And your group and your work, the Clearpath methodology that you mentioned too, in effect, it's an adaptation or an enhancement or an adaptation for healthcare of the PM2 methodology, right? And so just in parallel to that, some of you watching there, working with us more from maybe on a practitioner perspective, not so much from the research space, we have these 12 steps, a methodology of 12 steps of how to do a cross-mining analysis. And they're similar, but there's some overlap. So what we thought could be interesting now in the second half is to walk through those phases, going through the 6 phases of the PM2. And then for each of the phases, we will talk about, first of all, how did you adapt that step or that phase specifically for healthcare, and why. And for those of you watching familiar with the 12-step methodology, I will also relate it a little bit so that you can place, which step we are in this. Yeah. So I suggest let's do that. So maybe, I don't know if you want to say something about how.
Yeah, well, let me let's say a little bit about how we got there originally. And I mean, there's various methodologies in the literature. PM2 is my favourite one. I kind of like its structure. And for those that are nerdy enough to be interested in this, then PM2 is based on CRISP-DM, which is a data mining method which has got a really, really strong pedigree. So, and actually, all these methods are essentially Deming cycles, for those that are nerdy enough. What we did with what we wanted to kind of have a methodology for process mining. It was a little bit more agile, without saying we're not going to use PM2. The really question was, well, how will we use PM2? And how you use it, I think, is a way of sort of reframing it. In particular,
when you say more agile, do you mean more iterative, or what do you mean with more agile?
Yeah, I mean, so one of my background is I teach agile software engineering, so I'm coming in as this software engineer. So what I mean by agile is sort of following Agile Manifesto, really, but it's focusing on achieving results as quickly as possible through a series of iterations designed to be quick and dirty. That's a fair saying. Quick and dirty is better than slow and thorough.
Yeah.
Okay. I realise I've upset half the audience now. So with Agile, you just get on with it and you build something that works. And if it works, great, you make it better. And if it doesn't work, you make it better, and you just keep doing that. So the healthcare specific thing, which is other industries, other people might have something similar. The fundamental thing that you need to do with any of these exercises is to run them past domain experts. In our case, domain experts are quite often medical doctors or senior managers in hospitals. They are bonkersly busy, especially medical doctors. So if you want to have a medical doctor for 2 hours, they could otherwise be seeing patients. The opportunity cost of them being in a room with you is high. So one of the things that I've developed over the years is a way of working with medical doctors that sort of suits them. And that way is to just book all their time in advance. So one of the kind of fundamental building blocks of Clearpath method is book your doctors.
Yes.
And they'll have a rotation or a clinical cycle, and they'll have a PA. And if you get to the PA and book slots in their rotation cycle, you can get them. But so I book all my clinical doctors before I start the project. And then I use the availability of the doctors on a sprint cycle of usually 2 weeks or 4 weeks, and just or whatever the availability is. So it might be once a month, but you book them, and then you work so that you use time box the sprint to the deadlines the time box deadlines that you put in.
Okay.
And that's a very pragmatic thing, which obviously wouldn't be in PM2, but is the kind of thing that's in Clearpath.
And it's interesting. So that's kind of a leading principle that's kind of structuring then the sprints. And so each iteration will be, you want to be there with new questions and get the chance to get their input and then work further on the next kind of cycle.
Absolutely. And so what I found with the sprint, the clinical domain expert or reference group meeting might be 1 hour, might be 2 hours if you're lucky, but is a show and tell. So it's a show and tell where we show process models that we've built, and then we go with a pre-written list of questions, and it will be, does this look unusual to you? Would be the most obvious question. We are, you've got behavior in your process model, and it quite likely is going to be data quality. It may well be us or the analyst team misunderstanding what the mission was. So you've got arrival time, and there's 2 different arrival times. So which is the arrival time we're supposed to be using? So those kind of questions about mapping data in the database to the event log to effectively is probably starting from the point of view that probably is data quality, but you also find unusual behavior, and the clinicians, the really valuable ones, which kind of after 2 or 3 show and tells typically are, oh, I didn't know that's what we did. And so you're starting to surface behavior that was evident in the data that the clinicians themselves weren't aware of. And one of the powerful things, I think, is getting clinicians that are involved at different stages in a pathway, and getting those people from different stages of the pathway in a room together and showing them the pathway. Yes. And where one person sort of says, well, they leave my door and I don't know anything about them, and the next person says, well, actually, you're causing me real problems. Yes. Because you're sending me people that aren't the right people. Right. And so having that discussion along the pathway across the silos, brilliant. And
that's a beautiful point, and that's a general point for process mining. What we see, so I don't think that's. I can tell it's not a healthcare specific one. We have seen exactly this effect also for production process, manufacturing processes. Exactly, everyone is busy in their own little world, right? But if you can together look at the process or an animation or look at the process.
Let me just give you one example. This is a kind of cafe format, so I'm going to digress slightly.
Yes.
So one example is that we've looked at diagnosis of autism in children at school age, and we had exactly this. We had all the clinicians in the pathway in the room, but brilliantly, we also had mums. Right. Mums of children, and there was a point where we went through the pathway, went through the results, and it was taking 8 months to, I think, 2 years to get a diagnosis of autism for a young child. And we were able to say to the people that were doing it, why does it take you so long? And the answer was, we want to get it right. Yeah. And I turned around to the mums and said, mums, are you worried about them getting it right? They're going, no. We just want the diagnosis, and so you had perfectionists in ivory towers trying to get absolute perfection, and then you had children, school teachers and mums and parents just absolutely frustrated with the barrier.
Right.
And so if you can get away with it, then getting patient advocates or patient representatives into those rooms as well is really powerful, because they're the people that see the end-to-end process for real.
Very nice example. Thank you.
Oh, apologies, I'm still drinking coffee as well, by the way. So.
No, exactly. No, that's great. No, so I think that makes a lot of sense. So I think, thank you for setting the scene like that. So I think we can understand the background and the scenario in which you apply process mining for these types of processes. So we don't have to go in huge detail, but maybe just briefly, maybe to make it a little bit more concrete, right? So let's walk through these 6 stages and reflect a little bit like what happens in each of these 6 stages and where you had to adapt it a little bit. So I can prompt you like with each stage. So let's start with stage 1 is the planning stage and PM2. What comes to mind for that stage for you?
And I'll let you do the translation to the Fluxicon 12 steps in it afterwards. But so for planning, I would say that because I'm kind of motivated by Agile, I kind of, my planning revolves around very simple. I want to know what the research question is, but this research question would be really simple. Would be, what is the care pathway? What does it look like? And just defining it is enough. I mean, I will typically get people that come with a particular problem, like they think there's a bottleneck or they think there's an issue on weekends, or so they'll come with a specific problem. But I typically will kind of broaden it and say, okay, that's very interesting. Let's just understand what the pathway is first. Yeah. Because I find that people come to process mining with a whole load of expectations, which may be quite narrow, may be quite naive. And the starting point to me is just, look, let's just keep an open mind. Let's just model what we've got. Let's see what we can do. And then we will narrow it in the iteration. So my planning basically is get some research questions, but keep them very broad. Get the project team, and obviously that requires people that can pull the data out and manage the data, and obviously process miners themselves, and those people obviously need the kind of skills that everyone online has got, I'm sure. But in our case, because the data might be extracted and anonymized by the hospitals, the data extraction might be arm's length. And that's a particular problem, because we're going to have to work with the data extraction team, who maybe, they can pull out stuff with timestamps on, but the selection of the relevant people is a bit more challenging. Right. But then, as I said, getting a clinical review board, pre-booking the meetings, and then time box iterations, and then I'm trying to manage expectations. Say, look, we're just going to do as much as we can in the time available.
Yeah, that's also good. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's actually a good point. Managing expectations. Yeah, so getting the people together. So you have the domain expert side, but also the IT people you need on your team, and then the research question really being more about which is the core strength of process mining, right? Discovering what the process looks like in the first place. So. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so one thing we haven't mentioned, but and I'm not sure how much people in the audience will be familiar with this, but I also do quite a lot of business process modeling in parallel. So business process modeling might be as simple as a whiteboard with some post-it notes and sticking on. Or it might be, in our case, if there are clinical protocols, we want copies of them. So there's a kind of an exercise to get the qualitative perspective of the process as well, and I will do as much of that in preparation and as much of that in parallel as I can.
That's
I guess other people do that.
Interesting that you say that. That's also something that we recommend. So it's like, sometimes people have the idea, you discover everything from the data, right? But you need to have an understanding of the process, like a mental model, to do the validation and to check the data ultimately. So you need to have some idea of the process. And if there's not a process documentation already, even just on the whiteboard together with the domain expert, sketching out how they look at the process can be a basis that you can use later on in your project.
So when I had a team of business analysts, I would make them go and sit and watch the process.
Yeah.
And so in one case, I just said, you go and sit in the emergency department waiting list for an hour and watch what's happening.
Yes.
Because and the danger is that we as analysts like to be removed from reality because it's our comfort zone. So but you need to be out of that comfort zone. You need to be in the reality. You need to be physically watching the process, talking to people that do the process. Understanding kind of what their pain points are, and that's you can do secret shopper in some cases. You can talk to patients, you can talk to the staff. So that immersion in the process, I think, is really important as much as you can, and that helps it helps with credibility when you're then talking to the domain experts, because you can say, well, I've seen it, as opposed to I'm just pressing buttons here.
No, that's a great opportunity in general. If you can observe or be in the process, it's a very good starting point.
It makes it fun, it's fun to get away from the keyboard and not necessarily go stand in a hospital, but whatever your business processes are, just go and do it as a secret shopper.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk briefly how it relates to the phases that we see from the 12 steps process mining methodology. So what is covered, I think, in the planning phase in the PM squares, so it's about assembling the process project team, like you said, identifying the research questions, also selecting the process. Sometimes you have multiple processes that you could analyze, and sometimes it's clear already, it starts with the process, but sometimes you have different options. So the question is, which one do you choose? So for us, it's basically covering the first 4 steps in the 12 steps methodology, where the first step would be project or process selection. The second one would be project planning, where this involves also how, that's an important piece that we see, that people who apply process mining in their own organization, they need to also embed it in their way of working, right? So for example, you have these different use cases. There are auditors who use process mining for supporting audits, mostly to analyze compliance-related questions. But then you have process improvement teams who work with the business units to make process more efficient, more cost-efficient, whatever the goal is. And so there are already existing methodologies, for example, that auditors apply, or Lean Six Sigma teams apply, or PPM, or Plan, Do, Check, Act, or something. And then you need to fit your process mining activities in this context, right? So that's an important piece also to think about. Of course, assembling the project team. So who are the people you need to have on board? This exactly like you mentioned, the domain experts, but also IT. And then, defining the analysis questions is something that we recommend also. That's the third step, to do it in advance, to think a little bit more about also what kind of questions you have about the process, and to guide people away from just statistical questions. Sometimes they don't know yet what process mining can do, so they want to know how many patients do we have per day or something. But that's not a very interesting process-related question, right? So, so I think how does the process look like would be a much better one. And then we have a fourth one, which I'm curious what you think about, because it's ethical considerations. So we encourage people to, so I think it's close to what you were saying also, to think about early already about what data they are actually allowed to use, what they need to use it for, and to be very clear about this and maybe even document it in a good way. So we have this as a separate step in there. And it's also part of your planning, I think, right? The whole ethical preparation.
Yeah, it actually fits into, the planning. So stage 2 extraction in PM squared would be, it's it's challenging for us in healthcare because typically we have to write an ethics statement, we have to write a data extraction protocol, we have to write a data extraction request, we have to pay people because the hospital's IT team will have to do the work and they need some way to be recompensed for the work. So for us, that extraction process would include the ethics, but the ethics in the sense of actually having to write an ethics request. We, typically as an academic, we have to do a full ethics request, which go through an ethics review board. And there is a real problem with this in that timestamps uniquely identify individuals, even if you take off their name, address, all their personal identifiable data. There will only be one person who had a hip operation at that time in that hospital. So the timestamps are, it's our bread and butter. We need them, but we can't, we can't get rid of them.
You can anonymize them. Do you know in Disco you have an anonymization function when you export data? You can anonymize resources, case IDs, attributes, but also timestamps, and you can shift them in an unknown amount of time. So that could be
we've done the shifting where we do. We'll just fuzz timestamps, plus or minus a random number. Typically what we'll have to do, which you and I have discussed, Anne, is that we need to work within a secure environment.
Yes.
So we can't just put this data up onto the cloud, which means that certain product sets aren't available to us. So we need to work within a secure environment with tools that can be run within that secure environment. So we typically, anything with timestamps on, we would treat as potentially sensitive and therefore kind of respect that. So that, go on.
No, I'm so sorry. Please finish.
Okay, so the other thing I was going to say about ethics, which I think is very relevant to healthcare, it might be relevant to other people for different domains, is that healthcare has a very long, like an 80-20 rule, but there's also a 199 rule, which is the last 1% of patients are incredibly complicated and have got really, really complex conditions and complex treatments. And so it's the only serious, sensible way to do process mining is to kind of probably just look at the 80% separate to the 20% and then look at the 1% separate from the 20. And that 1% of very, very unusual patients, that data is incredibly identifying. There will only be one person in the country that's had that particular combination of complex treatments. And so I've told my co-workers and my teams when I'm working with people, we're not going to touch that. That last selection of very, very complicated patients, that's not appropriate for data analytics, in my view. Partly because it can the risk of re-identification is very, very high, but also because there's not much data science can tell you about such rare cases.
Yeah. And that's something that doctors already sometimes do, right? They can pull up these rare special cases and look at them individually and have kind of anecdotal inference. You don't really need kind of broad data processing for that.
Exactly. Yeah, there is the counter to that is that a lot of AI is trained on the 80% or the 99%, and the AI will therefore learn to ignore those unusual, complicated patients or cases. And the danger is that the AI that we develop on the back of this kind of stuff is ignoring minorities that shouldn't be ignored.
No, that's right. That's a whole separate topic. I think we don't have time to get into that right now. But we do have one question regarding the planning stage. Someone was asking, did you have changes in the project team, and did that change interfere with the project?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're always trying to sail a ship through stormy waters or whatever. You'll have meetings cancelled. Most obviously, people just can't make it to a meeting. The whole meeting's postponed.
But also, if people change roles or something, you probably have to re-educate them somehow. What you already did, or
exactly. I think all of the challenge. The tighter your brief and the tighter your industry and your sponsor, the tighter control your sponsor has over the project, then the more likely you are to keep everyone in line. But healthcare is very much like herding cats, in that they will randomly go in completely. And you have an entire meeting that's gets dominated by everyone obsessing about one thing that you showed them. And you've not had the chance to show them the other 10 things.
Yes, I can imagine.
So it's not easy. I'm sorry, I pretended it. I didn't want to pretend it was easy.
No, exactly. All right, so let's go to the second stage, and we don't have to rush, but let's try to go a little bit quicker through the remaining ones. So the second stage is data extraction. So what did you have to change with respect to what PM Square does there?
It's just about the lead. It's the very long lead time to get data. That's it. I mean, it just sometimes you can plan the project and then you just sort of like, we'll stop the project until the data arrives and then we'll start the project when it's here. One technique that I've been using reasonably successfully in the last year or two is synthetic data.
Okay.
Where we create synthetic data that looks and behaves like process data, create a synthetic event log, and that allows the team to be busy doing something while we're waiting for the real data.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, you can already do a lot based on that.
Yeah, and just you can write all the code and you can get your basic models and you can calibrate it and you have lots of useful discussions. But obviously, at some point, you really still need the real data.
Yes, of course. Okay, and just as a quick reference for those of you familiar with the 12-step cross-mining methodology, it's a data extraction and data suitability review steps, which basically fit into this stage. All right, so third stage is data processing. What did you have to adapt there?
Okay, good. So I think one of the things we do is we look at how to slice and dice the data in different ways. So typically, you'd be looking at data from a hospital or a clinic or something, but you look at a cohort of patients. So you won't look at everybody that goes through the hospital. You look at people with functional neurological syndrome or broken legs. And so slicing out patients of interest is challenging. Those people that are familiar with healthcare might be aware that we quite often like to have a control cohort. So there's a particular thing in healthcare, it might be useful for other people though, which is that we will select people with a particular condition or that we're interested in, but then we'll select people that have not had that condition, but have the same or similar demographic profile.
Okay.
So I might take 300 people with a particular type of cancer, and I'll take 300 people who've not had that cancer, but who are of the same age, demographics, etc. You're going to create a profile. And so what we then do is get our control group and our study group and the event logs for both and merge them back in, shuffle them up again, and then put them back into Disco or a process mining tool. And you at that point, you'd hope that the people that didn't have cancer would not have cancer investigations and vice versa. But at least you can kind of study it and you can produce results that are more scientifically valid because you've got a comparison between a study and control arm.
That makes
sense. That might be way over the top.
But that's very specific. Yeah, I can see that, but it makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
and it's because the reason it's useful, and people might find this useful in other industries, it's because we're taking out a certain cohort from within the larger log, and because we're taking those out purposively, we want to control for that selection process by taking others out that have rough matching. So I think it would be appropriate for anyone who's like selecting a particular type of people, type of patient, type of case.
Yeah, it's a good point. Actually, it's one thing that comes to mind is when people, for example, do some pre-processing on the data. So one of the things you often do in cross-mining is that you're looking at completed processes only, right? So especially if you want to analyze throughput times or something, it doesn't make sense to analyze a half-finished case, which appears very short, but actually it's not finished yet, right? So then you filter based on start and end points, but actually it's useful to have a sense of what's the the base data from which you have selected those. Because if you end with X amount completed cases, are these 5%, 10%, 80% of the total data that you have? And to also get a sense of what did you not select and why, and maybe you were missing something. So yeah, it's always a good idea to have this kind of counter selection piece there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So yeah, briefly from the 12 steps cross-mining methodology, these would be the data transformation and data validation steps. So we have them as two separate steps. Data validation is really about problems in the data where something is wrong, but in the data transformation, these are basically data pre-processing steps. And we actually, maybe I will point to this also in the show notes. We had a deep dive session on this with Cici from Utrecht University, who's working on data pre-processing patterns, among other things. And so there we actually really talked about how we see this and what the different types of pre-processing are, focusing on that. And we also have another session just on data quality with, among others, Niels Martin. And I will share that too. So.
Yeah. Good.
Okay, so next stage is then the mining and analysis, stage 4. What did you have to adapt there?
I'm just looking at my notes. What we would I think the adaptation there is probably the marriage of the process mining with the process modeling. So I think mining. One of the things that we're acutely aware of in healthcare is what is the data that we don't have. And that's because maybe they're still using paper records or they just don't write it down. And so the process that my stakeholders would like to study isn't fully represented in the process that we mine. So the question would be that those steps that we know are in the business process but are not in the data, what do we do about those? And so we've kind of got some techniques that we've developed around inference of those missing steps that are not in the model. Sorry, not in the mining, not in the data set. And so that's one reason why we do the process modeling in parallel. And then so there's a mapping exercise.
Right, and you built a simulation model or something, right? Do I have that correct?
So one of the things that we've done is do a lot of work with process simulation, which would look very similar to the animation that you showed earlier, but that was an animation of real patients as opposed to an animation of simulated patients. The advantage of simulation, or one advantage of simulation, is you can, once you've created a realistic simulation that you've calibrated to reality and that people are happy with, you can then do what-if analysis.
Yes, exactly.
And what-if analysis would say, well, what if we cut that time from 2 hours to 1 hour?
Yeah.
How would that affect does that remove a bottleneck? So process simulation is fun because you can kind of do counterfactuals. Yeah. And what we did with our process simulations, we put costing on it. So each of the activities had a cost. We could put a cost on that. You could then run through a simulation of a care pathway saying how much it costs currently and what percentage of patients got the right type of outcome. In the simulation, you can say, well, if I had this new device or I had this new tool, new approach, how much would my costs hopefully go down, and how much would my patients hopefully benefit? Yeah. So your simulation, you're always trying to find that sweet spot of faster, shorter, cheaper processes that lead to better outcomes.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you want, of course.
You're always trying to find that. So simulation allows you to kind of do stuff with your reference group and your domain experts to kind of.
That's interesting, and cross-mining can be a great help to get to that simulation model, which at the beginning represents reality close enough that you can actually start doing these what-if scenarios. So we also have a cross-mining cafe on that. I will link that too. Okay. In terms of the fourth phase, so what we have there in the 12 steps, cross-mining methodology is a distinction between explorative and targeted analysis, which we see is almost always a distinction that's worth making in the projects, because we do encourage people to start with concrete questions in the beginning, like we had. That's the step 4 in our case, mostly to also not be lost in the complexity. So it's quite good if you know, what do I actually want to know, what do I care about, in this process, but also maybe to make sure that they get the right data, that if there's a particular attribute field, that they capture that and that's in the data so they can do the analysis. But before you can actually do the targeted analysis, in the explorative analysis, you're really trying to understand how the process actually looks like, and you want to also catch all those things that you didn't know. You're not sure, is this what's the reason there, right? So understanding the variance and the whole process behavior. So often we see that this is really kind of a distinction. First, really understanding everything, and once you have full understanding, then you can go into analyzing and answering basically the questions that you had. Okay, let's go to the next phase, evaluation. So that's a separate phase in PM square. And that's, if I understand you correctly, that's the place where you connect back, where you have these kind of pre-booked slots, like every month or every 2 weeks or something.
Yeah, exactly. So the evaluation effectively is the show and tell, and book them in advance, so it's iterative. And hopefully it goes from discussions of data quality and method and understanding the data to, really understanding the process and conversations about how the process can be improved. And so I think that we've kind of planned that. Maybe shall I just jump to stage 6, because I think, unless if you got what's the equivalent in your 12-stage method, Anne?
For the evaluation, in our case, so the next step is making recommendations. So basically having improvement ideas, ranking them. But I think part of what's in PM square is part of this evaluation phase would be, in our case, part of the analysis, both the explorative and targeted analysis, because, for example, they say validation, but also refine questions, diagnose and refine. And that's something that we see a lot, especially when we're talking about the targeted analysis. You have in the beginning maybe an idea, okay, I want to check this particular question, but once the question meets the data, you realize, there's actually this precondition should not be true, or that should be true, and then so you refine it so that it really meets, you refine the question once you are trying to answer it with the data. So part of the evaluation is also, in our case, in these 2 analysis phases, but then it's the recommendation phase, which is the 11th phase.
Yeah. So in PM squared, the stage 6 process improve. So the point about evaluation is that that's where you iterate round and you keep iterating, where stage 6 would be kind of a one-off end. So in that, the kind of process improvement bit, some kind of finishing is whatever it is to finish, isn't it? And the thing I've observed, which maybe I don't want to sound jaded, and I don't want to sound too jaded here, is that the really brilliant, whatever it was, the brilliant recommendation, the brilliant insight will have come out of a roundtable discussion with the domain experts.
Yes.
Where one of them will go, we don't need to do that.
Yeah.
Or something, or why don't we just send them to there instead? And it'll come out of a discussion, which whoever suggested that will then take the credit for it, not me.
Yes.
And so my jaded reflection, having done this 3 times, is, working with clinicians is lovely, but then they always take the credit for it. I feel, well, okay, I catalyzed the discussion, and you take the credit. Go on.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, but that's true, and they wouldn't have had this idea. But in the end, it's also good, because if they think it's something that they came up with, then it's something that they're going to do, right? Because that's they need to change ultimately, and that's only something that can happen if that's something that they really believe in. So the best way is if they came up with it themselves.
And then I can give them the ammo. I can give them all the data to back up what they want to do. Sorry, if there's any clinicians that I work with on the call, I'm just sorry. But I think it's a joy to do, and it's a collaborative project. The idea that I don't think it's sensible to aim to just keep everything tight and then suddenly go da-da. It's better that we get to that da-da moment together as a team.
Of course, exactly. No, it was an excellent discussion. Thanks so much, Owen, for walking us through those steps, for sharing your case study. Maybe as a last word before we close, is there any recommendation that you have for people who are maybe interested in applying prosmening in healthcare but haven't yet, or anything else that you want to say?
Yeah,
before
okay.
we
Well,
start?
so the paper we've got on our challenges, so do look at that. If you're doing process mining in healthcare in the UK, get in touch with me because I'm happy to support you. We have our National Health Service has a team of 5 people specialising in process mining in healthcare. So there is a national team whose job it is to help people around the country do process mining in healthcare, and I work really closely with them. So if you're doing process mining in the UK, fantastic. If you're doing it elsewhere in the world in healthcare, consider coming to one of our Pods for Health events. We have some online things a bit like this Café. So they're obviously primarily academic, but I think if people are interested enough, then we'd be really interested to talk to practitioners. And those people not working in healthcare, I kind of think hopefully you've heard and seen some parallels, and I'm hoping that those parallels will be things that you can take away, and as well as a good coffee, hopefully.
I'm sure. Thanks so much. Thanks again for being here with us.
How exciting. Thank you, Anne, for inviting me. This is such an exciting thing to do. So I'm really pleased to have been invited. And I'm not sure I'll be able to catch all the videos of the previous ones, but I'll try and come to some in the future, especially with Niels and CC.
Yeah. Exactly. We will link all that. Excellent.
Okay, brilliant. Well,
thanks again, and thanks to you all there watching. So we were happy to have you. We hope to see you again soon for another edition of the Prosmening Café. But for now, we're closing and wishing you a great rest of the day.
Finish my coffee.
Yes, drink some coffee. Bye everyone.